Auzubillahiminash-shaytanir-rajeem. Bismillahir-rahmanir-rahim. Assalamu alaikum. This is Dr. Huri Amir, Head of Physiology Department, Faisalabad Medical University. Now, dear students, as we have started the topic of limbic system and we have done the components, the parts of the limbic system, what are their functions, what are the effects regarding the cognition, reward, punishment, learning, the memory, the emotions, the feelings. So we have done them segmentally, and today I'm going to talk about amygdala. Now, as it is the portion of the limbic system, let's talk about the functions of amygdala. Now, amygdala is a complex of multiple small nuclei which are located immediately beneath the cerebral cortex of the medial anterior pole of each temporal lobe. Now, it has abundant bidirectional connections with that of the hypothalamus as well as with other areas of limbic system. So, we have to know that it is immediately lying below the cerebral cortex, just close to the anterior pole of temporal lobe. Now, in the lower animals, the amygdala is concerned to a great extent with that of the olfaction. What is that? That is the sense of smell. Olfactory stimuli and their interrelations with that of the limbic brain, they are the function of amygdala in lower animals. And one of the major divisions of the olfactory tract terminates in a portion of the amygdala called the corticomedial nuclei, which lies immediately beneath the cerebral cortex in the olfactory pyriform area of the temporal lobe. In the human being, another portion of amygdala is present, which is basolateral nuclei, and has become much more highly developed than that of the olfactory portion, and it plays very important role in many behavioral activities which are not generally associated with that of olfactory stimuli. The amygdala receives neuronal signals from all portions of the limbic cortex as well as from the neocortex of the temporal, parietal and occipital lobes, especially from the auditory and visual association areas. Now, because of these multiple connections, the amygdala has been called the window through which the limbic system sees the place of the person in the world, as it is getting and giving the connections to the different areas of temporal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe. So that's why the word window has been given to it. In turn, the amygdala is transmitting the signals back to the same cortical areas, into the hippocampus, into the septum, into the thalamus, especially into the hypothalamus. Now, what are the effects of stimulating the amygdala? Stimulation in the amygdala can cause almost all the same effects as those elicited by direct stimulation of the hypothalamus, plus other effects. Now, effects initiated from the amygdala and then sent through the hypothalamus include increases or decreases in the arterial blood pressure, increases or decreases in the heart rate, increases or decreases in gastrointestinal motility and secretion, defecation or micturition, pupillary dilatation or rarely constriction, piloerection. Now, secretion of various interior pituitary hormones, especially the gonadotropins and adrenocorticotropic hormones. Aside from these effects, immediately through the hypothalamus, amygdala stimulation can also cause several types of involuntary movement, and these include tonic movements such as raising the head or bending the body. circling movements, occasionally clonic rhythmical movements, different types of movements associated with olfaction and eating, such as licking, chewing, and swallowing. Stimulation of certain amygdaloid nuclei can cause a pattern of rage, escape, punishment, severe pain, and fear, similar to the rage pattern elicited from the hypothalamus. Stimulation of other amygdaloid nuclei can give reactions of reward and pleasure. Now, what is kluverbucy syndrome, which is the effect of bilateral ablation of amygdala? Now, when the interior portions of both the temporal lobes are destroyed in a monkey, for experimental study, this removes not only portions of temporal cortex but also of the amygdalas, which lie inside these parts of the temporal lobes. Now, this is going to give rise to a change in the behavior, and that is called the kluverbucy syndrome, and which is demonstrated by the animal that animal is fearless, is not afraid of anything, has extreme curiosity about everything, forgets rapidly, has a tendency to place everything in its mouth, and sometimes even it tries to eat solid subjects. Often has a sex drive so strong that it attempts to copulate even with immature animals, animals of wrong sex, or even animals of different species. Although there is presence of similar lesions in human beings which are rare, afflicted people respond in a manner not too different from that of monkey. Now, functions. Broadly, if we talk about the functions of limbic system, the most poorly understood portion of limbic system is the ring of cerebral cortex, which is known as the limbic cortex, which is surrounding the subcortical limbic structures. This cortex functions as a transitional zone through which signals are transmitted from the remainder of the brain cortex into the limbic system, and also in the opposite direction. The limbic cortex in effect functions as a cerebral association area for control of behavior. All behavioral patterns can be elicited by stimulation of specific portions of the limbic cortex. Ablation of some limbic cortical areas can cause persistent changes in an animal's behavior. Ablation of the anterior temporal cortex. Now, when the anterior temporal cortex is ablated bilaterally, the amygdalas are almost invariably damaged as well. It was pointed out that the kluverbucy syndrome occurs. The animal especially develops consummatory behavior. It investigates any and all objects, has intense sex drives towards inappropriate animals or even inanimate objects, and loses all fear and thus develops obedience as well. Ablation of posterior orbital frontal cortex. Bilateral removal of the posterior portion of the orbital frontal cortex often causes an animal to develop insomnia, associated with intense motor restlessness, becoming unable to sit still and moving about continuously. Ablation of anterior cingulate gyri and subcallosal gyri. The anterior cingulate gyri and the subcallosal gyri are the portions of the limbic cortex which communicate between the prefrontal cerebral cortex and the subcortical limbic structures. Destruction of these gyri bilaterally releases the rage centers of the septum and hypothalamus from prefrontal inhibitory influence. The animal can become vicious and much more subject to fits of rage than normally. Now, summary is that the cortical regions of limbic system occupy intermediate associative positions between the functions of specific areas of cerebral cortex and functions of subcortical limbic structures for control of behavioral patterns. In the anterior temporal cortex, one especially finds gustatory and olfactory behavioral associations. In the parahypocampal gyri, there is a tendency for complex auditory and thought associations derived from Wernicke's area of the posterior temporal lobe. In the middle and posterior cingulate cortex, there is a reason to believe that sensory-motor behavioral associations occur. So, this is all about the limbic system. We have done it in quite detail, and you should all be able to, you're all desired to attempt all the different type of scenarios given from this, like you can time and again I have told you about. So stay blessed and Allah Hafiz.